Chapter 9. Friday, April 30, Sup, th/Sup, 1852. We're still on the Platte River and planned to be for a good long while. The company seems to finally be well for a while, and no more people have died since Sunday. That doesn't seem like long, but on the trail deaths have occurred often. Captain Bedwell made us walk early and late every day this week to make up for stopping for Sharon Clavin to give birth to little Josiah, but we don't care. We still think stopping that day was the right thing to do. It doesn't matter that the days are longer when we see the baby's big blue eyes peering at us. It does help that I'm often able to get meat for supper while we are walking. Most days I can anyway. Hannah and I enjoy our time with the children, and now that Sharon is joining us most days, it is even more fun for us. I think it disturbs the captain when we laugh and have fun, because he is so miserable himself. It's odd to think we all wanted him as captain because we knew he would push us hard, but now that he's pushing us hard, we think there could be someone better for the job. It just goes to show that you don't always want what you think you want. Mary was ready for their day of rest. The men had all been asked to vote as to whether they wanted to drive 2 hours extra every day for the rest of the week, or to give up our Sabbath. All voted to go extra, and Bob kindly asked Mary's opinion before he placed his vote. The two of them agreed on what to do, so it was quite easy for him to vote the way she asked him. She still couldn't trust him to always vote the way she would want, because she knew it wasn't possible for them to agree about everything. The longer days were much harder for some, but Mary knew she'd be the same kind of sore every day regardless. It truly didn't matter to her. Her mother was taking over more of her chores every day, and she was even asking some of her younger brothers to help with the dishes, which her father was angry about most of the time. Mary should be helping you with dishes. She's a girl. And I want my boys to be able to do women's chores and my girls to do men's chores. Mary is doing a great job of keeping the company supplied with food, and no one is complaining about that, but she's still expected to do women's work all day every day. You want me to go with you to Oregon, then you will provide me with the help I need, even if that means asking your precious sons to do some of the work. What has gotten into you? Pa asked. I see the error of my ways finally. It's not my job to kowtow to you and do everything you say with no argument. My girls need to know that they have a say in this world, and I mean the little ones too. Not just Mary. Mary has come with us, she has helped with the children, helped with the cooking, the dishes, and the laundry. She has brought in half the meat, and she has married at your command. Do you really think that your other daughters should feel the need to only do women's work? Mary is doing more than her share with just supplying food. You will let her have some free time with her new husband, and the boys will help with the dishes. Pa stared at her for a moment, looking angry, but he finally threw his hands in the air and walked away, and when Mary's eyes met Bob's, she could see that he approved of her mother standing up to her father. That was one thing that never changed about Bob. He was in her corner every minute of every day. After supper that night, they took a blanket and went outside of the circle of wagons, planning to sleep under the stars. They took a bar of soap down to the river and bathed each other slowly, enjoying the opportunity to touch one another. Mary wasn't sure why her mother had never told her about the wonderful joy that came with lovemaking, but she had a feeling it was because she didn't feel the same spark with her father. How could she? The man didn't care one whit about how his wife felt about most things. At least Hannah had done her best to explain how things really were, even though it had been hard for her to do so. As they walked back to their spot to camp that night, Mary told Bob how much she appreciated the fact that he treated her as if she had a brain made for thoughts and not full of fluff. He smiled. What makes you say that? He was glad she finally understood that he saw her as an equal, but he was surprised. He'd worked hard to get her to realize how he felt, and she was just now admitting she understood. The fact that you always ask me what I think and how I feel. Pa has never done that with Ma. Never. It has bothered me since I was old enough to notice it, and since we know I'm a thinking, breathing person, then we know I was quite young when I noticed it. I remember being a little girl and asking Ma why she let Pa boss her around. All she could say was, because that's how it is. Men are in charge. I never could accept that. That's my Mary. Ready to change the world, no matter what it takes. Bob smiled, really proud that she didn't think the way everyone else did. It made her unique in a way that pleased him. Mary smiled at him. I like that. Because you said it, you may kiss me. Bob laughed and pulled her to him, quickly divesting her of her clothes. I'll do more than that, wife. There, under the stars, they made long passionate love to one another, and Mary was thrilled she'd chosen Bob for her husband. There was no other who would have suited her even half as well. The following day, Mary felt a contentment she'd never felt. Seeing her mother stand up to her father, and then having Bob tell her that he liked the way she was, well, it gave her confidence and a sense of peace. Every day with Bob had her happier and happier she'd married him, but she felt bad that she couldn't yet say she loved him. She couldn't love the way her mother did, and what other way was there? As she walked with Hannah and Sharon the next day, she asked, "Are you in love with your husbands?" Hannah looked at her. I love Jed with all my heart, but it didn't start out that way. It didn't? Mary asked. You two always seemed in love with each other. She was shocked to hear her friend hadn't loved her husband from the moment they saw each other. I met him the day before I married him. I wasn't ready to be married yet, but my stepfather had pressed the issue, and I had no choice in the matter. Hannah shrugged. I liked Jed right away, and when we talked privately, I realized that he would make me a good husband, so I agreed to marry him, but I still didn't have much choice in the matter. Mary turned to Sharon. What about you? Were there really others who weren't madly in love when they first married? She'd assumed all marriages were normal except hers and Bob's. I knew Peter in school. He walked me home every day, but I had a crush on another boy. I asked Peter to leave me alone, but he wouldn't. Finally, I found out the other boy was walking a friend of mine home, and my parents liked Peter, so I agreed to marry him. I don't think I fell in love with him until a few months later, though. It wasn't a sudden flash for me. It was being friends, and then falling in love, if that makes sense. Mary nodded. It does make sense. So, I'm not a terrible person if I don't feel like I'm in love with Bob yet, she asked. Not at all, Hannah said. It's different for everyone, and I think you do love Bob. Mary shook her head. He told me he loved me the other day, and I didn't feel the need to say it back. Hopefully I will soon. I do have to say that I love being with him because we have fun together. But enjoying spending time together was different than being in love. She was sure of it. That's a good start, Sharon said. That evening, there was still enough light left that they divided into couples to play cards. The captain must have decided they'd done enough penance for insisting to stop when someone gave birth. Bob and Mary played against Jed and Hannah, as usually happened. They were a foursome who had fun together, so they liked to keep it going. I guess we'll be going the normal amount tomorrow, Mary said. We only missed about 4 hours of walking when Sharon had her baby, so maybe we've done enough that we can have a normal day tomorrow. Bob nodded. That's what he told the men earlier. He's an odd man, the captain, but I don't think he's as bad as everyone thinks he is. Everyone was relieved they wouldn't have to keep leaving early and staying on the trail late. It made for even harder days than they were used to. Hannah wrinkled her nose. He forced his wife to walk, which led to her death. He didn't want us to stop until Sharon had her baby. He's making us make up the time that we missed by stopping early. Jed smiled. That's all true, But have you talked to him about why he feels the need to get there so quickly? Hannah shook her head. No, I try to avoid talking to the captain. Remember, there's always another side to every story. Perhaps when he went on the trail last time, he saw people die because they froze, starting too late in the year. He doesn't really talk about his first journey west, and there must be a reason. Hannah and Mary exchanged a look. They were both still skeptical, but there was no reason to argue with Jed. But tomorrow will be a normal day, right? Mary asked, needing to change the subject. Bob nodded. It will. We'll only do the usual 18 to 20 miles. Which was more than enough for anyone. Jed looked at Hannah. How's the baby doing? Mrs. Clavin is walking with you every day, right? He's so perfect, Hannah said. I'm looking forward to the day when we have a baby of our own. Mary shook her head. Not me. I want time before a baby comes along. Imagine how I'll look 8 months pregnant running around shooting deer with my musket. She laughed softly, surprised when Bob didn't laugh with her. Hannah and Jed laughed. I'm sure you'll still be shooting then too, Mary. I can't imagine anything else from you, Hannah said. As Mary and Bob walked to their private place to sleep that night, Bob asked, Will you really still be shooting when you're 8 months pregnant? He asked. He didn't like the idea of her putting their child in danger, even though the child didn't exist yet. Mary nodded emphatically. As a midwife, Ma has always taught me that pregnancy is a stage of life, but it's not an illness. Women who refuse to take care of their normal chores while they are expecting have a much harder time giving birth than women who work throughout their pregnancy. Her ma had equated it to practicing to run a race. If you wanted to run a race and win it, then you practiced by running every day. You didn't sit around conserving your energy for the race. I can see that, Bob said. I just worry that you'll try to do too much. Maybe we should wait and worry about that when I'm pregnant, if I ever am. I may be barren. And, oh, how she wished she was barren. Having children was still not something she wanted. Maybe she was a strange woman, but her freedom would be gone with the birth of a baby, and that was the last thing she wanted to happen. No, she was happy with no babies, even though most women weren't. You're right, Bob said. He said a silent prayer that Mary wasn't barren. He hated the idea of never having children who would be a perfect mix of him and his beautiful bride. I love you, Mary, he said as he said to her most nights. As always, she turned to him and kissed him, not responding the way he wanted her to. She never did. She was happy to make love, but she didn't love him. It made him sad. After, they lay in each other's arms, and Mary snuggled as close as she could. She wished she could tell him what she knew he wanted to hear, but she knew it wasn't right to lie to him either. Hopefully she would soon be able to answer with the words he wanted to hear. He held her close as she drifted off to sleep, but he lay awake for much longer, wishing he knew what was wrong with him that his wife couldn't return his love. Asterisk. After the extra walking they'd done most of the week, that Saturday went by quickly. When the day was done, and supper was over, all the women went to the river and worked together on the laundry so that they could have a day of rest the following day. A true day of rest where women weren't working on the laundry. Mary knelt between her mother and Hannah and scrubbed the clothes on a washboard. No one bothered to carry the water to camp, instead they all went to the river to take care of the wash. It was much easier than how most women would have done it, but Mary had learned early on that she had to conserve energy on the trail. There was simply too much work to be done every day. Ma nudged Mary with her shoulder. You and Hannah had the laundry business right from the very beginning. There was no need to carry the water. This is so much smarter. Mary grinned at Hannah. It was Hannah's idea. Hannah looked at Mary. Are you sure? I thought it was your idea. No, I think it was yours. Mary truly had no idea who had first thought of it, but it was fun to give credit to her friend. Ma laughed. It doesn't matter whose idea it was. It was a good one, and we have all benefited from your joint brilliance. Mary laughed. Hannah and I have joint brilliance. Maybe I should be dancing with Hannah tonight, and not with Bob. No, you'd kill me. I'd get my foot stuck in a gopher hole, and that would be the end of me. Hannah shook her head. You save that crazy dancing you do for Bob. It makes him happy. I'm not so sure I make Bob happy anymore. He looked really sad last night, and again at supper. Mary felt badly that she couldn't give him the words he wanted to hear. I could give you some pointers for that, but your mother is listening, Hannah said with a wink. Hey, the preacher's wife is supposed to be a good girl. Mary shook her head at her friend, losing her sense of humor, but feeling the need to tease her about it. But I never planned to be a preacher's wife, so you need to give me a little time to learn to be good. Ma shook her head. You're both silly girls. Forget that I said you were brilliant. You have cotton for brains. Mary felt the need to quote the old saying she'd heard her whole life. For what God has forgotten, he supplied cotton. Even Ma laughed. That's for what's lacking in your bodice, not for what's lacking in your head. She shook her head at Mary. We're not lacking in the bodice, Ma. Do you think Hannah is lacking? I mean, I haven't looked very closely, but if you think she's lacking, we should probably tell her. Ma shook her head. What has gotten into you tonight, Mary? I'm stalling, because I made Bob sad. I don't want to see that sad look on his face ever again, and it's the only look he seems to give me lately. Mary, you need to figure out what's wrong, and you need to take care of it. You've only been married for a short while. You have to take care of it now, before the problems pick up more speed like a snowball rolling down a hill. Yes, Ma. Mary said the words, but she didn't know how to fix the problem. She agreed she needed to because Bob meant a great deal to her, and they were going to homestead together when they arrived in Oregon, but how to fix the problem was something else entirely. Mary finished the laundry around the same time Hannah did hers, and the two of them walked up the hill to hang the clothes. As they worked, Hannah tried to find out how she could help her friend. When did he get sad? Hannah asked. Mary sighed. Every time he tells me he loves me, and I don't say it back, he gets sad. I hate making him sad, but I really don't want to lie to him either. No, lying to him isn't the answer. Are you sure that's what's bothering him? Mary shrugged. It's the only thing I can think of. What else could it be? You're doing well with your marital activities, aren't you? Oh, yes. Every night we sneak down to the river and bathe each other, and then we make love under the stars. Every single night. There's no problem there at all, except when he tells me he loves me after. Mary shook her head, wishing Hannah could help her. Wishing someone could help her. Could you tell him that he makes you happier than you ever dreamed possible? That might throw him off the trail for a little while, but I really think you love him as much as he loves you. Mary shrugged. How would I know if I love him? I've never been in love with a man before. Being married doesn't come naturally to me like it does to you. When he's not with you, do you think about him all the time? Hannah asked. Well, yes, of course. Mary thought that was a silly question. Good. When you are with him, do you think about how to make him happy? Mary nodded. Yes, but that's just being a good wife. When you cook something, do you wonder if Bob is going to like it? Of course, I do. I'm cooking for him after all. I think you're in love with him. Think about how you'd feel if you lost him. Mary felt a flash of pain to her stomach. I don't think I could bear it. Mary, you're in love with Bob. Now that you've admitted it to me, perhaps you could admit it to him, and he'll quit being sad. Bob is a good man, and you want to spend your life with him. Whether children come or not, you will love Bob. There is no reason to hide it from him. Mary felt a slow smile cross her face. You're right. I love Bob Hastings. Now I just need to go and tell him. I'd wait until after the dancing, Hannah suggested. Why? Because if you don't wait until after the dancing, the rest of us will miss the show you two put on trying not to run everyone else over. Mary laughed, feeling lighthearted for the first time in a long while. She was in love with Bob, and now she could finally tell him. Chapter 10. Saturday, May 1, Sup/Sup, 1852. We're still traveling along the Platte River. Since the very beginning of this journey, I have felt like the Platte was a carrot dangled before us, a place where there would be plenty of water and game. I'm so glad we made it here, but it doesn't live up to my expectations. From tales told about it, I expected to be able to look at the river and have fish jump out to us. As I look across it, I hate the idea of having to ford this river. I don't know how we're supposed to cross it, but it seems too wide to be able to make it across. Especially for those who can't swim. But I do know it's possible, for others have made it to Oregon, and to do that, they must have crossed the mighty Platte River. With today being Saturday, there should be dancing this evening, and I look forward to it. Bob is the best dancer in the company, and having him as my partner is a great deal of fun. As much as I dreaded marrying, I do think Bob is the right man for me. He always makes me smile, and he doesn't complain about my boyish ways. He simply helps me do as I want to do. I thank God every day for sending him into my life. Now I just need to figure out how to tell Bob how I feel. When it was time for the dancing to start, Mary walked to Bob and held her hand out for his, instead of waiting for him as she usually did. He looked at her with a question on his face, but he put his hand in hers and joined her on the dance floor. She wanted them to have a perfect evening together that night that would lead up to her telling him she loved him. He deserved it with as long as he'd waited. The two of them did their wild dances as they always did, and Bob almost ran over the girl with the peppermint stick. They laughed when it happened, and Mary watched as her husband grew happier and happier. The peppermint stick girl seemed to be fine, and she kept spinning in the middle of the dance area, her arms spun out to her sides. Once the musicians had given up for the night, and everyone was going to bed, Mary smiled at Bob. Let's go for a walk and talk a bit. She was determined that she led up to the moment when she told him. He would be happy however she did it, but so much happier if she made a production out of it. Bob eyed her for a moment, wondering what on earth she was up to. She never asked him for walks or asked him to dance. In that one way, she played a traditional female role. Of course, he had never expected it to last. All right. Let's get our tent and blankets as well. That way we don't have to come back into camp to get what we need. Whatever she had in mind, he was willing to go with her. He trusted her implicitly. Mary nodded, taking the blanket, while he carried the tiny tent they had shared since they married. They found a spot just outside of the circle of the wagons and dropped their things before walking down by the river. They would find it after their walk and erect the tent then. Does the Platte River live up to your expectations? She asked, not wanting to just startle him with her pronouncement. It would be easier if they spoke about other things before she sprang the news on him. I suppose. It's pretty, but it's a river like all the other rivers we've camped on. He really didn't think the Platte was anything to write home about. Of course, he didn't plan on writing home about any of the rivers. They all seemed to run together in his head. Do you think it's too wide to cross? Mary wanted him to promise her he wouldn't attempt to swim across again. When he'd done that before, she'd been frightened for him, and they hadn't even been a couple yet. Now she wasn't sure how she'd react if he tried to swim across on his own. I think it's much too wide to cross here. We'll have to find a place where it's narrower, And I think the captain already has that place in his mind. He said it would be a while before we found a good crossing spot. Bob shook his head. He always knows what he wants, even if he doesn't communicate it to the people around him. I just hope you'll be more careful next time, she said. I hate the idea of you swimming across and getting hurt. She wasn't sure she could bear the fear that would accompany such a swim. Bob shrugged. I think I'll let one of the unmarried men do it next time. He grinned slowly. Maybe the captain. He definitely wouldn't let the captain do it, because of his sons, but it was fun to joke about. Mary laughed. We both know there's no way the captain would ever risk himself. Very true. Besides, if we lost him, who would lead us? I have no idea. Though I think there are many who could if it came right down to it. Captain has a map he's following. There are plenty in camp who know how to follow a map. Mary shrugged. I think any number of men would be a better captain than Bedwell. That's very true. Bob shrugged. I won't be the one to swim across if we find someone does need to swim across. I need to be better about providing for my wife. And any future children. Eventually, they would have children, and he wasn't sure how she'd cope. Thank you. I appreciate it. Mary walked a little closer to the river before sitting down and watching the river ripple. She hugged her knees in front of her, staring down at the small waves that passed. It's getting pretty dark. Don't you want to sleep? He was surprised she hadn't wanted to go to the tent already. Normally, she wasn't one who liked to wander around after dark. He joined her on the bank of the river, simply enjoying her company. Mary shook her head. Not just yet. Tomorrow is Sunday, so we don't have to walk. Instead, we have our day of rest. She was relieved to have that day of rest every week. It would be so much harder to keep going without it. I love our rest days, Bob said, tilting his head back. Jed is a good preacher, and it gives us all time to just relax. Of course, there's hunting to be done and clothes to wash. Several of the women have started washing clothes at night, so all the work that needs to be done on Sunday is minding the children and cooking. She smiled. I like the lazy Sundays better than the Sundays where I have to work all the time. God knew what he was doing giving us all time to rest. I don't blame you, he said. I like the lack of constant moving. I know we'll get back to it, but the Sundays off are godsends. My arms get so tired of driving all the time, and I'm sure your legs and feet ache. They do. Thankfully, we haven't had a ton of rain so far. I hope that doesn't change. Though she knew rain was needed, it made the rivers harder to cross, and the wagons moved slower in the rain. She wanted to finally be in Oregon soon, and they were on pace to be there earlier in the year than most wagon trains. She simply prayed it would stay easier with less rain. He nodded. The lack of rain has made our journey much easier than it could have been. He glanced over at her, seeing her silhouette in the setting sun. How other men didn't see her as the beauty she was, he would never know. Her boyishness never bothered him, but he knew Jamie hadn't been impressed by it, which was good. He wouldn't have liked to have had to fight with his friend over her. To him she was a perfect woman in every way. Mary glanced his way and saw him watching her. She smiled. I love you, Bob. She waited for a moment for him to react to her. She'd expected an immediate grin, and when it didn't happen, she was nervous for a bit. He stilled, frozen for a moment. You do? She nodded emphatically. I do. I didn't really understand what love was. I talked to Hannah and Sharon this morning, and they both said that I was being silly. She sighed. I was expecting a love like my mother has for my father. A love that would compel me to want to do everything you told me to do. A love that would make me always want to make you happy. And though I do want to make you happy, I don't feel the need to be a perfectly obedient wife. That was something she would never be, and she was sure he already knew that. I would never ask you to be, Bob said, still a little overwhelmed with her declaration. It had been completely unexpected, but he didn't know if he would have been able to believe her if she'd said it after he told her he loved her. I'm a very different woman than my mother is, and I know most men want women that are like her. I'm so glad you saw past my boyishness to the woman inside, Bob. I really don't know what I would have done if I'd had to marry someone like the doctor or Jamie, who would have expected me to stay in camp and never hunt. She shuddered. Besides, the idea of either one of them kissing me makes me feel a bit queasy. And they would be more like bulls with cows than you are, she grinned as she mentioned cows, knowing very well he would be amused. Are we back to the cows again? Mary, stop worrying about the cows so much. Mary laughed. I'm not worried about the cows anymore. Do I seem nervous when you touch me? She wasn't any longer. Not one little bit. She looked forward to their nights of passion. She wasn't at all sure things would be the same once they were settled in a cabin somewhere together and not camping out under the stars. Bob grinned. Not at all, for which I'm eternally thankful. If we needed to have the cow discussion before making love every time, I think I might lose my mind. Though he'd certainly attempt it if it made her feel better. She giggled. I think I'm doing lots better with the cow thing. I don't even think about them when you touch me anymore. Though I still love cows. I think they're marvelous creatures. He shook his head, chuckling softly. That's probably for the best. I kept worrying you'd start yelling something about cows while I was making love to you, and that may have hurt the mood a little. The best thing about Mary was that she could make him laugh in any situation. She was perfect for him that way, because Bob loved to laugh. More than making love beside a river? She asked. Where a snake could join us in our bedding at any moment. She shuddered at the thought. As long as she had her musket, she wasn't afraid of snakes, but it was off with their blankets and tent. I don't want to think about snakes joining us. Or spiders, Mary said, shaking her head. I can kill just about any animal with my musket, but I want to scream every time I see a spider. I'm not sure why, but it just kind of happens. Her parents had always thought she was odd, able to handle a musket easily, but afraid of spiders. She supposed she was a little strange, but she thought she was strange in the very best of ways. Is that going to be my primary job in our marriage? He asked. Protecting you from spiders? Well, that and making love to me, of course. I think those are probably equal tasks. She grinned at him, knowing he'd like that task being mentioned. I'm so glad you brought that up. I mean, I was worried you'd forgotten about lovemaking. Mary laughed. Like that would ever happen. You know as well as I do, I look forward to it all day. She leaned toward him and rested her head on his shoulder. I think maybe I need a night where we just hold each other sometime too. Without lovemaking. At the moment, that time seemed far in the future, but she knew it would be something she eventually wanted. I think we could arrange that. Let's say in 1875? Bob suggested. She laughed. Maybe a little sooner than that. Perhaps 1855? No, that's much too soon, he said with a grin, wrapping his arm around her. You know what I'm thinking about doing now? Oh, probably making love again. She said the words as if she was making fun of him, but of course she wasn't. She loved it as much as he did. Sleeping. Why are you constantly nagging me to make love to you? He shook his head. I guess since you asked. She laughed. Bob, you are absolutely naughty. Do you know that? Mary couldn't imagine a man who would suit her better than her Bob. He knew just how to joke with her to make her laugh. He got to his feet and reached down to help her to hers. Let's go find our spot and set up that tent before it's too dark to see where we're going. The sun had set, and it was getting very dark on their little portion of the prairie. Mary looked up at the sky. It is getting dark. Maybe we should go back to the circle of wagons and sleep in there like normal people. Normal people don't plan a walk of 2,000 miles. Trust me. There are no normal people in the circle of wagons. You may just be right about that. It took a few minutes, but they found the tent and were able to set it up quickly. When it was done, Mary smoothed out the blankets they used every night. There, now we're ready for sleep. Oh, we're not sleeping yet, Bob said, kneeling on the blankets and gesturing for her to join him. Once she had, he took both of her hands in his and leaned forward, gently kissing her lips. I love you, Mary. I loved you from the very moment I laid eyes on you back in Independence. Do you know what my first thought was when your pa introduced us? Mary shook her head. No, but I have a feeling I'm about to find out. I thought, oh, heck. I just got this job, and I won't be able to keep it, because I'm going to spend all my time chasing after the boss's daughter. I guess it's good that you married me. He had never imagined the first time he'd seen her that she would consent to be his wife. She and her musket had been intriguing from the very first day, though. She laughed. Want to know my first thought when I met you? I'm almost afraid, he said, grinning at her. Had she thought he was beneath her because he was working for her father? I thought it was going to be a really long journey if I was expected to be around you every day and could never touch you. Mary shrugged. I thought you were awfully handsome, right from the first. And then Hannah came, and I was afraid she'd be interested in you until I found out she was married to the preacher. Her marriage saved her friendship with me. No doubt about that. He blinked. You wanted to touch me? And then you started asking me to dance, and I felt like that was all I needed. We touched a little, and I went to sleep in my tent with my sisters. And then you kissed me. That kiss, well, I never wanted it to end. When Pa told me I had to marry someone, I wanted him to tell me it had to be you. I didn't want you to think I was choosing you, but I wanted you to be the person I married. He laughed. And instead, you were forced to choose me. He frowned for a moment. I do have a confession to make about all that. I think it was Jamie who went to your pa and told him your plans. I told him I wanted to, but that I couldn't, and I think he thought he was helping me. Mary shook her head. He did us both a favor in the end, didn't he? I think he did, Bob said softly. When we reach Oregon, I want to live near him. He has been a really good friend to me. You know, if we keep living near the people in this company with us, we're going to end up having an entire village just populated with our friends and family. Bob smiled. That sounds good to me. Are you complaining? She laughed. Never complaining. I'm just not sure that's what you're supposed to do on the Oregon Trail. Collect people and force them to live near you when you arrive. Probably not, but let's do the trail our way. Sounds perfect to me. I love you, Bob. And I love you. With everything inside me. I'm still not sure I want babies. He laughed. Maybe by the time God provides them, you'll feel differently. I certainly hope so.